First, I want to thank the House. There's a lot of things the House has done in the last 3 weeks to do exactly what they campaigned on. And my goal is that the Senate start doing the exact same thing. We have a Republican Party out around the country. We need to have a Republican Party here, and Republicans need to stop caving. With regard to the debt ceiling, the far left, the big government crowd, and Wall Street tell you all the time, they put out all the time, you have to spend more money, run up more debt, and raise taxes. And if you ever say that you need to stop, then they say the world will end and we'll have plagues that even Moses would flinch at. It is a complete lie. We can balance the budget, right? Our states do it, countries do it. Now, if we don't balance the budget, who makes money? Well, DC bureaucrats do really well. The people that make money off of government, they do really well. Wall Street sells a whole bunch more bonds, they do really well. The rich are going to continue to get richer. And guess what happens to the American public? Their mortgage rates go up, their credit card interest rates go up, eggs cost more, meat costs more, and the average American is paying for all this. Now, I did this. I did this when I was governor. I walked in with a $4 billion budget deficit, and the same thing happened. If you don't spend more money, borrow more money, Florida had borrowed a net additional $1 billion a year for 20 straight years, and they were going into default on their debt. We balanced the budget. We actually cut taxes. And in 8 years, we grew our economy, I think, by over 20%, and we added 1.7 million jobs. This is all doable, and if we don't, when anyone goes to the grocery store this week, you can blame everybody in D.C. that's not willing to live within our means for your interest rates going up and the cost of your eggs and meat going up.
I think you have an impossible job. I can't imagine trying to defend a $6.8 trillion budget. I mean, if you look at what this president has done, and you have to come here and defend it, the biggest budget in the history of the country, unbelievable increase, massive inflation, massive deficits, no plan to balance a budget. I mean, not even close to a plan to balance a budget. Debt that continues to go up, wages not staying up with inflation, low labor participation. So I think you have an impossible task. I sent you a letter, just to make sure you had some of the questions I was going to ask. So let me just go through some of those. Do you believe that excessive government spending, especially deficit spending, causes inflation?
As I talked to some of your colleagues earlier, I believe inflation, we see it as a global.
No. My question is real simple. Do you believe excessive government spending, running big deficits, causes inflation?
I believe one thing does not cause inflation, and what we see is inflation is pervasive around the globe.
That's fine. I mean, no's an answer. So that's no. The federal debt has risen to more than $31 trillion. Since Biden took office, it's almost up $4 trillion. Do you believe that his budget reduces debt, the debt of the country?
Senator, one, I use $24.7 trillion. That is publicly held debt. The rest of the debt that you cite is other government trust funds.
You think his budget reduces debt?
Our budget focuses on the deficit, which in turn has an impact on the debt.
So that's a no. Okay, that's fine. So is President Biden's budget balanced? Meaning, are we going to spend more than we collect?
Senator, no, because we believe that would hurt working families.
Okay. What are you paying right now under for interest? What interest rate, and what's the duration of the debt?
The duration of the debt, as you know, depends on Treasury policy on what they do in the bond market. But right now, it's about a little over 5 years, the maturity of the debt.
And what's the interest rate that you're paying?
The interest
in the budget?
Yeah, the interest rate is close to 3% on the budget on the debt.
So, and do you believe do you believe in your budget, are you assuming interest rates are going to come down then?
We do show what we believe are accurate forecasts where interest will rise and then level off. Of course, interest rates are rising now as the Fed deals with inflation.
And what will the federal government have, under your budget, what will the federal government have to pay in interest expense next year?
Over $600 billion, $661 billion.
So as a percentage of the budget, do you know what that is?
I'm happy to not do math here, but give that to you for the record.
So since 2019, so pre-COVID, last budget pre-COVID, how much has the U.S. population gone up, do you think? You have any idea? I'll give you.
We
I
talked to
didn't
your,
ask it.
but
It was not my
yes,
letter, so you.
5-6 million people.
Yeah, 6 million people. So as a percentage, how much is that, you think? It's less than 2%, 1.8%.
So the question, is like, what do we spend per person?
Yeah, so here, let me ask it this way.
Yeah.
So the population since 2019 has gone up 1.8%. How much do you think your proposed budget has gone up from the 2019 budget?
So one way we look at it is that spending is down roughly 5 percentage points of GDP since the president took office.
So it's up, so here's the numbers. So the population in the last 5 years has gone up 1.8%, and your budget would take the budget up 55%. Now explain why, and that's $400,000 per new American. So why would we only have a 6 million increase in the number of Americans since 2019, but had a 55% increase in our budget? How could anybody explain that?
Senator, I'll take your information as fact, but the way we look at a lot of these budget measures are percent of GDP. We think that is the way to determine health. And I stated federal spending has gone down as a percentage of GDP since the president took office.
Well, there's COVID. But let's go back to pre-COVID. That's not even close to being true if you go back to 2019. So the GDP has not gone up 55%. I mean, so you come in, and Biden came in the middle of a COVID crisis. So of course there's extra COVID spending. But I mean, think about it. Let's go back. Population's only up 1.8%, and your budget's up 55%. That's staggering.
So I know people don't want to give the president for presiding over a $1.7 trillion budget deficit reduction, but he did. And that did not happen by accident. Had he not gotten the pandemic under control, had a vastly successful vaccine program, I'm not sure pandemic spending would have ended because we would have still been dealing with the scarring of the pandemic and the economic fallout from it. So because he did that, I believe we're in a better place economically.
55%.
Senator Van Hollen, and then
In September 2021, President Biden's misguided and dangerous decisions in his botched withdrawal of U.S. forces from Afghanistan led to America's most stunning, unforced, and humiliating defeat in decades. Due to President Biden's carelessness and failed leadership, 13 U.S. service members were lost. Billions of dollars of U.S. military equipment were left for the Taliban, and here's a picture of some of it. And hundreds of American citizens were stranded behind enemy lines. The world is now a more dangerous place. Our enemies like Russia, Communist China, and Iran are emboldened, and the American people are rightfully furious. We must have accountability, and the best way to do that is establishing a bipartisan and bicameral joint select committee on Afghanistan, similar to the Iran-Contra Committee, to conduct a full investigation and compile a joint report on President Biden's tragically failed withdrawal from Afghanistan. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment.
Mr. President.
Senator from Indiana.
Thank you. Thank you guys for your service. Thank you for all the men and women that serve. On the Personnel Subcommittee for Armed Services, Senator Warren and I had a presentation on how bad we're doing on recruiting. And our recruiting numbers are pretty pathetic right now. It seems like, I remember I joined in 18, joined the Navy. We knew who our enemies were. We knew what the military's role was. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of Americans are a little concerned. We got some polling data from the Reagan Institute and the National Independent Panel on Military Service and Readiness showing us that many Americans and a majority of active duty service members find the military to be politicized and focused on what divides us instead of what unites us. So if that's true, what can you do and what are you doing to make sure? Because I think when Senator Sullivan was bringing up the fact that we shouldn't have Marines in pictures like that and with speeches, what are you doing to make sure our military is not perceived to be a political arm of whoever the president is? Doesn't matter whether they're Republican or Democrat.
Well, first of all, I would just two things. First, in terms of the satisfaction of the troops that are in the ranks and how we view ourselves. Senator, I would just point to the fact that we have the highest re-enlistment rates probably that we've seen in several decades. And what that means is that people are satisfied they're with the opportunities they're provided and with the development they're receiving. The second thing is with respect to recruiting. As you know, there are a number of things that have combined to create headwinds, and they include the lowest jobless rate that we've seen in many, many years. Also, 2 years of COVID. And you know, Senator, without recruiters not having access to high schools and centers of influence for 2 years will have a profound impact on our ability to recruit. Our leadership in the services is doing the right thing. I mean, our secretaries, our chiefs are doing the right things. They're investing, beginning to invest the right monies in advertising and encouraging their recruiters to be in the right spaces. They're hiring the right people to be recruiters. Now, I used to be a recruiter, so I'm not guessing at what this takes. I know how hard this is and what you need to do to be successful. They're beginning to do those things again, and I think we'll see the trends move in a different direction.
So next year we'll have good numbers?
Next year you'll have better numbers. We'll be where we want to be probably the year after that. It took 2 years to get us to where we are because of COVID. It'll take a little bit longer to get turned around. So.
Senator, I've had many tanks and conversations with all the chiefs on this whole topic. Yes, we have a recruiting challenge, no question about it. I do think there is a cause and effect linked to COVID. I'm not blaming that, but we do know that recruiting numbers are directly linked to contact time. And because kids haven't been in high schools and we haven't had the recruiters in the high schools, contact time is very, very low. So consequently, you have much lower recruiting numbers. That's one key factor. Another key factor is just the familiarity with the American citizenry with their military. Now we're at an all-time high, 50-year high of re-enlistment, which is incredible, actually. That indicates that the people in the military are satisfied with what they're doing every day. So that's an all-time 50-year high. But 80%, about 70 to 80% in that range, depending on the service, of our folks in uniform are in uniform who have a family member in uniform, either a father, mother, brother, sister, aunt, uncle, grandfather, grandmother, something along those lines. So it's familiarity with the military that makes the difference, I think, in terms of recruiting. And that's where we got to get out. We have to get out more into the society. We got to make sure we increase our contact time significantly. And on the politicization piece, look, I have tried from day one to make sure that we have an apolitical, nonpartisan U.S. military. If we have anything other than that, that is a danger to the republic. We must remain a nonpartisan, apolitical military. That's fundamental to this country. That's what I'm committed to. That's what all the generals are committed to, and that's what you have right now, and that's what we want to continue to keep.
Joe Malley, I liked your answer to Senator Sullivan on you being able to compete against China. Do you actually believe that all the countries you named will show up if China invades Taiwan?
I think in different ways, yes. Perhaps not all with combat forces and that sort of thing. I think allies operate differently. Every country operates in its own strategic interest at the moment in time. But I do know that we have an incredible network of allies and friends around the world. And in the Pacific, we have a series of bilateral defense treaties that are ratified by the Senate. And those are ironclad, you know, with the Republic of Korea, Japan, Philippines, Thailand, Australia. These are treaties that, you know, we are committed to fight on their behalf, sort of thing. So I think we have a network of allies and partners that gives us a strategic advantage over China or Russia, for that matter. If you look at who China's friends are, it's not very many. They're operating in a purely transactional way around the world. They're trying to garner as many natural resources as they can from around the world. But there's not a lot of people who are, quote unquote, friends with China. There are many, many countries that are very tight, very close with the United States, and that's a great strength of ours, and I do think they would be there in time of need.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Thank you very much. Senator Rosen.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Scott, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks, both of you, for being here. Xi, in the last 12 months, has given a variety of speeches that he is preparing the Chinese population for war. How do you, what should we take from that? How do you, each of you assess that?
So as we listen to Xi Jinping and his style of communication, he has been on a long-term campaign to oversee China's rise. Now that he's in his third term, we see his rhetoric picking up. I believe that there are a number of dates out there that mean different things to different people. We've talked about 2025, 2027, 2035, and 2049. I think the bottom line is he's told his military to be ready for what we are not sure, when we are not sure. DI watches this very, very closely, and we evaluate closely every word that he says and where he goes in his speeches.
Thank you. I just to add, but certainly agree with everything that General Berrier said. I think we continue to assess that he would prefer to achieve unification of Taiwan through peaceful means, but the reality is that he is and has directed his military to provide him with the military option, essentially, to be able to take it without concern of our intervention. And that is something that will have a meaningful impact on his capacity to do so and also his decision-making, presumably.
Have you, do you assess the position the American economy would be in with our dependence on communist China if they did decide to invade Taiwan and we decided to come to Taiwan's aid? What impact would that have on our economy?
Yeah, it's not, obviously we can't provide precision because the scenario will matter when it happens. All of those kinds of things would be critical to actually providing an assessment. But it is without question, and there have been studies done by external think tanks and others on the impact, the economic impact that an invasion of Taiwan would have on the global financial economy. I will say that because TSMC the manufacture of semiconductor chips on Taiwan, if that is blocked, it will have an enormous global financial impact that I think runs somewhere between $600 billion to over $1 trillion on an annual basis for the first several years on the global financial economy is the general estimate. Because those chips, those advanced chips are in over 90%, come from Taiwan, and they're in almost every category of electronic device around the world. And so therefore, until we would be able to sort of make up the difference, that would have this enormous impact. It will also have an impact on our GDP if there were such an invasion of Taiwan and that was blocked. It would also have an impact if they stopped making chips on China's economy. And I think that's another aspect of this, and in fact, a more significant impact on their GDP if they were unable to get those.
You want to add anything?
Just that I think watching the impact that, the economic impact on Russia as they've invaded Ukraine with the sanctions, not an exact comparison, maybe apples and oranges, but I think it gives us an idea of how to model this when it happens, or if it happens.
What's your assessment of risk in Latin America? Senator Kramer talked about Haiti, but we know Cuba is a state sponsor of terrorism, and they've allowed our adversaries to be in Cuba. Maduro's doing the exact same thing in Venezuela. So what's your assessment of the risk of bad actors being in Latin America, and what's the risk that Communist China is going to be able to open up military bases in Latin America?
For the time being, I would say the risk is moderate. We do see Chinese and Russian actors in Central and South America, something that we watch very, very carefully. We have a consistent messaging campaign through our defense attaché network in Central and South America to talk about why this is a bad deal for them. We watch it carefully. I don't think they're very, very close to acquiring full-up operational bases in Central or South America right now.
Anything you want to add? All right. What's your assessment of the commitment that Germany has to make sure that they'll do everything under their power to make sure Ukraine succeeds in the war against Russia?
I think, honestly, that Germany has exceeded our analysts' expectations prior to the war, for example, in terms of its commitment to providing support to Ukraine, and we've seen them be actually a stalwart ally on this issue, and moving forward.
Nothing to add on that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Opportunity to be here, and thank you, Mr. Bialik, thank you for being here. What year did you start the Fed?
2011.
All right.
Between 8, 9, and 10, how many bank failures were there in the country, do you know?
Between
In
8, 9, and 10?
2008, 2009.
Oh, before I got there?
Yeah.
I can't give you an exact number, sir.
Once you got there, would you agree that if there's a bank failure, that the Federal Reserve probably has some responsibility?
If it's a bank that they supervise or regulate, sure.
So in 2008, 2009, 2010, there were banks that the Federal Reserve was responsible for that failed, right?
Yes.
So since you've been there, have you done any review of why those banks failed and any failures of the Federal Reserve?
My predecessor would have done those at the time,
But
sure.
you haven't done any since you got there.
We have done, but I think there was one MLR a bunch of years ago, but nothing significant and nothing recent.
How many banks that the Federal Reserve was responsible for have failed since you've been there?
I'm sorry, how many?
How many banks have failed since you've been there?
Less than a handful, I think.
Okay. So let's say 6, if you think that's the right number?
That would be a guess. I'd really want to look into it and get you an exact number. I don't want to mislead the committee.
So of those, let's say it's 6, how many reports have you done that anybody was fired because they failed to do their job?
I can't answer that question. I don't know.
Does that mean none?
I can't answer. I don't know.
Do you know of any?
I'm not aware of any, no.
Okay. So as far as you know, of bank failures, of any report that you've done, no one's been fired?
None that I have heard of.
Okay. So with regard to the stock disclosure, right, that there was there's an accusation of insider trading. You've done some reports, but you haven't released that publicly yet, right? All of it.
Correct.
Has anyone been fired?
There are 2 matters that we've closed out. There are 3 matters that are still open, ongoing investigations.
Was anybody fired?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily know.
Okay. So why wouldn't you know?
Well, we provide our work and issue our reports, and
You don't follow up?
the 2 reports that we issued, or the 1 report that we issued on the 2 investigations that we closed out, didn't have findings of wrongdoing. So I wouldn't expect there to be the kinds of actions that you're referring to.
Okay. All right. So I've been up here 4 years. For the first time since I've been up here, with that unsolicited, a federal employee wrote me a letter. Senator Warren and me a letter saying you disliked our idea of having a presidential appointed supervisor election, or a inspector general. Right. So first off, that surprised me. So first, did you tell Chairman Powell that you were doing this?
No, I did not.
Did he say anything to you after you did it?
No, he did not.
Did you talk to anybody at the Federal Reserve? You just did it completely on your own.
I did.
Okay. So you believe that you can adequately do your job when you report to the same people you're supposed to review?
Senator, as you may know, the concept of a DFEIG, Designated Federal Entity IG, of which I am one, there are about 30, almost half of the IG community, are IGs appointed by their agency heads. The others are the PAS, presidential appointees, subject to Senate confirmation. There are differences of view within the oversight community about whether the mere appointment authority of a DFEIG provides some question about their independence because the person.
I mean, if Chairman Powell can fire you, you're going to go. Let me ask you a question. Have you done a review of any member of the Federal Reserve Board and ever said anybody on the Federal Reserve Board, anybody, has ever done anything wrong?
We have investigations going on all the time where we find wrongdoing. And if I can, Senator, we wind up deciding to do our investigations completely on our own without any input from anybody. Nobody has attempted to try to prevent us from doing any of our investigations. And the fact that the IG here can, along with all of the other DFE IGs, can be removed by their agency head is a part of the fabric of the community. Here at the Federal Reserve, there's an additional protection, if you will, if you believe this is a protection, that it isn't the Federal Reserve Board chair who can remove the IG, it's got to be based on a vote of 2/3, a supermajority of the entire
Ask you a
board.
question. Since you've been there, how many times has the chairman of the Federal Reserve proposed something at a board meeting and it didn't happen?
I can't answer that.
Yeah, probably not. So I ask one more question. So you suggested in there that you make $350,000 a year, and you suggested if we went back to the pay scale for the president-appointed inspector generals, we wouldn't get competent people. That's what you said in your letter. So does that mean that the inspector generals we have that are presidentially appointed, you don't think we're getting the competent people to do the job?
What I was referring to, Senator, in that letter was simply that the future, the eventual IG, should this position be converted into a PAS IG, would be making significantly less than the current arrangement is, and that puts them at a certain comparison vis-a-vis the rest of the Federal Reserve Board executive leadership, which the statute, the IG Act, set up as the appropriate pay scale for DFE IGs.
So if we get this legislation passed, all right, and the pay scale goes down to a little over 200,000, will you quit?
I honestly haven't made that choice or decision, haven't thought about it.
Okay. So, but just let me finish. No one, so think about it. There's 23,000 people, I think, that work at the Federal Reserve. There's not a report you've done since 2011 that you know of any person that's been fired. You don't remember, you don't have any, there's nobody at the Federal Reserve on the board that's ever done anything wrong. We don't have any information, good information on what happened on the stock trades. And you think that we should be happy that we don't have an independent, presidentially appointed inspector general? I mean, this doesn't make any sense. And this it's got a balance sheet of $8.6 trillion, and then the last 12 months, the balance sheet, the Federal Reserve has lost $500 billion. I mean, name another agency that has that big a balance sheet in the federal government.
If I can clarify something, Senator, when you were asking about what happens as a result of our audits and evaluations and bank failures, that is what I said I couldn't cite for you numbers of folks who have been fired. I did also say we conduct investigations all the time, and there have been people fired as a result of our investigations. That's a separate workload for us.
Can you get me a report? I have not found one person. If you go back to the 2008 financial crisis and you go to what's happened this year, I've never heard of one person at the Federal Reserve that lost their job. Clearly, these banks did the wrong thing, but somebody at the Federal Reserve that was responsible for these banks for supervision clearly did it wrong. And guess who pays for it? The average person in America pays for all this. These bailouts are ridiculous, and we've been doing it for decades, and it should stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Scott.
Senator Scott, please proceed.
Thanks, Chairman. Thanks for holding the hearing. Mr. Rector, in the last 2 years, how many people, first of all, I come from an immigration state. I've come from Florida, so we have a lot of, primarily Latin America, but some Eastern Europe, but a lot from Latin America. So, our economy is, over the last, especially 50 years, a lot of it's been developed based on legal immigration from Cuba, Venezuela, and then, of course, American citizens have come from places like Puerto Rico. So, in the last 2 years, how many people have come into our country legally, and how many people have come in illegally?
Equal. I know illegally, it's been 5 million people. We know that by looking at the encounters that result in an admission to the country. It's absolutely unprecedented, and this discussion is a little distorted because we talk about needing STEM engineers and things like that. They're not STEM engineers or PhDs with electronics engineering coming across the border here. All of that immigration historically is very, very low educated. and it is not going to produce technological change or anything. Many of these people have an 8th grade education, and what they actually do, in my perspective, is to push out the lowest skill American workers, particularly minority workers, right out of the workforce, and there's a massive literature that indicates that.
So you think there's been in the last 2 years, about 5 million legal
Yes.
and
No,
5 million illegal?
I believe so. I know the illegals. I haven't.
You don't know, does anybody know the legal number of people who have come here legally in the last 2 years?
In the last 2 years?
Yeah.
We've awarded about 2.1 million green cards.
For 2 years, so about.
For 2 years.
Yeah, okay, so 2.1 have come here legally and 5 million illegally. So if you come here legally, what benefits does the government give you versus if you come here illegally? Does anybody know?
The
Director?
Yeah, the legal immigrants after 5 years are eligible for the welfare system, 90 different means-tested programs. They also are eligible for Social Security and Medicare. But that's a little illusory because the welfare programs primarily have eligibility through children. Illegal immigrants have children, they get in the welfare state. So, and basically we're promising amnesty, which most of the members of Congress, or at least on the left side, want amnesty. That would give the illegals eligibility to absolutely everything.
But just, let's go back. So if you come here legally,
Yeah,
is there a cost to other taxpayers?
absolutely. Again, the simplest thing to
So
understand.
it's just on the legal?
Just on the legal,
What would be the average cost to an American citizen if somebody comes here legally?
It's a couple $10,000 a year, depending upon the education level. Again, the simplest thing to understand is if you bring in someone with a college education, they're going to pay more in taxes than they take out in benefits. If you bring in somebody with a 10th grade education, it's exactly the opposite. Over the course of a lifetime, they're going to take out about $3 of benefits for every dollar of taxes they pay.
Okay, so if you come here legally, right now,
That's legal or
if you
illegal.
come here legally, 2.1 million people came here legally. Let's just take it for, they come here. They come here legally, they get their green card. Do they cost us money?
Yes.
Are they productive citizens day one?
The welfare system is designed to support people who work, okay?
Okay.
So they, in fact, do work, but they also receive enormous amounts of benefits. That's the nature of the welfare state.
Do the
So-
people that come here illegally get more benefits?
No, they get slightly less, so they're actually slightly less expensive to the taxpayer. But the bottom line is, a person with a 10th grade education, 11th grade education, we redistribute income to that person very strongly, whether they're born in Kentucky or whether they
So let me
come
ask you a
from
question.
abroad.
So what you see in the news is places like New York are saying that all these illegal immigrants have come up there, and now there's housing and hotels, and they're giving food vouchers and things like that. So a legal citizen doesn't get, if somebody comes here with a green card doesn't
Absolutely
get
not.
that.
New York City is a little extreme because they have a right to shelter there. But the bottom line is, again, I've studied the welfare system and what I call the broader transfer system for my entire career. If you have people that are less skilled, we support them. We don't require them to pay much in taxes. We give them lots of benefits from welfare, Social Security, education for the kids, all of which is free, all of which has to be paid for by the U.S. taxpayer. And when you bring in that type of individual through either illegal or legal immigration, it puts enormous fiscal pressures on the rest of the taxpayers.
Okay. So so nobody knows that number, is if you came here legally, what it costs us versus if somebody came here legally. Nobody knows that number. There's never been a study.
Yes, I can give you that number. I've done that study.
Okay.
And it's about 50% higher if you're legally holding education constant, okay? Because the illegals do not get means-tested welfare to the same degree. The group.
Have you ever done it? Have you ever seen anything on this? Has there anybody ever done a study on, like, take the 2.1 million people, okay?
I think the witnesses are better positioned to answer the question.
Yes, Senator, I have done
But
that
have you ever,
study.
you have? Okay, I'd like to see it, because
Absolutely.
here's the way I look at it. It's not fair to the person that comes here legally, right? It's completely unfair to somebody who busts their butt, comes to the legal process, because first of all, it's not free. It costs them money. My office does a lot of this in Florida, as you would expect. And we help a lot of people go through the process. that have a right to be here. They have a right to be here, but they don't know how the process works. And then the lawyers, it's shocking how much these people are paying. So that's one thing. But I'd like to see a study of that. But first off, I think it's completely unfair if somebody comes through the process, then somebody comes here illegally. Second, it would be nice to know what the cost of the shelter and all this stuff is, because that does cost us, and all of us are going to pay this in taxes. And then the other question I have is, it has to impact, and I don't know where the number, where you limit it, but it has to impact jobs. I mean, if there's way more people in the job market.
There is a very extensive literature on the impact of low-skill immigration on low-skill American workers, particularly low-skill black male workers, okay? And I know of 80, I think it's 83 studies of that I have read and studied.
Do the rest of you agree with that? Do you guys agree with that? You don't think that?
But the bottom line is 9 out of 10 of those studies show that there's a significant wage loss effect when you bring in low-skill immigrant workers to compete with those low-skill American workers. It's just, the literature is overwhelming. It's just overwhelming, and it's common sense. It's what economics tells us.
We are beyond the senator's time, but I did see Mr. Beer reaching for his microphone, and he was spoken over by Mr. Rector, so let me give him a chance to add his response to the general question asked by Senator Scott.
If you look at when we saw the greatest wage growth in the United States for the non-college educated population, it was from the 1950s through the 1970s, when the labor force growth for that population was 3 times what it is now, and since the 1980s. So the idea that we're seeing more labor force growth, more labor force competition for this population is totally untrue. In fact, that population is in decline, and we need workers to fill these types of jobs. We talked about manufacturing, talked about meat processing, talked about farm workers. There are jobs, and in fact, there are far more job openings than there are unemployed people in the United States right now. If you want a job, I can find you a job, no problem.
Yeah, it would, well, logically you would say that if there's more workers, it's going to impact my ability to get a job. Just a kid growing up in a poor family in a poor neighborhood, that's what you would say, right? I think that's logical. Now, there might be other factors that are going to grow your economy faster. But I think the other thing we're dealing with is the fact that we have now a labor participation rate, and we've got 100 million people in our country that are of working age that are now not working. And we got to, all these things, it's not like just one thing we're going to fix. We got to fix immigration, and we got to get people back to work. And it's because it's not going to work if we don't. So.
Again, I saw Mr. Beer trying to respond, if you don't mind letting him.
Yeah, just the logical point, yes, when more people come in, they increase the supply of labor, but they also increase the demand for labor. So if I can hire a worker on my farm, I'm buying equipment that worker is going to use, and that's increasing demand for workers in manufacturing. I could give you countless examples. In the H-2B visa lottery, when the losers who don't get the visas don't create more jobs for Americans, the ones who win the lottery create more jobs for Americans.
So it's, I'm pro-immigration. I'm pro immigration. Okay.
I know.
I'm pro-immigration.
Yeah.
I just think we've got to figure out, I think we have to do 2 things. We have to get Americans back to work, and 2, we have to figure out how we incentivize, create a system where we get people to want to come here to work and not be dependent. Because, I mean, I think we have to do both of those things. And there has to be limits. I mean, you can't say 100 million people. If all of Guatemala comes tomorrow, they might be wonderful people, but we couldn't afford that.
If I could give another historical example.
Thank you. Well, let me wrap up at this point. We're 5.5 minutes over the senator's time.
Say the question again.
Sorry, what do you think about the Gaza hospital attack? Do you believe in Israel's...
I believe in Israel. I mean, I've never seen Israel intentionally hurt civilians. I mean, this idea that these people are attacking Israel, I mean, it's wrong. And let me tell you what else is wrong. The President of the United States given $100 million to Gazans and the Palestinian PLO. I mean, stop thinking for it. We have 31 Americans killed. We don't know how many Americans are hostages. And we got a president that wants to give money to Gazans? Give me a break. And by the way, go look at the videos. There's pictures of these terrorists with humanitarian first aid kits. There's pictures all over Israeli press about these rice bags with bullets in it, right? So this is a humanitarian effort, right? So there's no way that Hamas doesn't get this money. This is stupid, right? And on top of that, let me just add something else. So we also know that here's what we're doing. We're taking American tax dollars and giving it to the Gazans, all right, and the PLO, and guess what the Palestinian Authority can do with it? They can go pay terrorists to die. So if it was my child that died, they tax me and give money to somebody who killed my kid. This is crazy.
So what about the innocent people living in Gaza that have nothing to do with the terrorists?
Then you should ask Hamas why they're killing them. Hamas needs to, Hamas.
I'm asking you why do you not support us helping them, not Hamas?
You're not helping them. You're not helping them. You're helping Hamas. You're helping the Palestinian Authority. I mean, you're giving money to help Hamas to go kill more babies and destroy more babies and destroy more families. That's exactly what you're doing.
The president in Israel said when he was there that there would be guidelines and to guarantee that.
So how in the living daylights did they have first aid bags, humanitarian first aid bags that Hamas had? How do they have all these people? Wait, I'll answer the question. You ask the question, I'll give you the answer. And then how in the hell do they have humanitarian rice bags with bullets in it? Nowhere. This is the stupidest idea where they were holding American hostages. Let's talk about American hostages, get them out, and talk about these Americans that died before we ever would think about giving money there.
What about the guidelines? So you don't want to answer the question.
Not a repeat of this terrible atrocity.
Thanks, Senator Scott.
In Florida, we've got a lot of individuals that have family members in Israel. And we have a lot of people in our state that came from Israel. I've had a lot of trips to Israel. Yesterday I talked to a lady that worked at a kibbutz that I had the opportunity to visit on one of my trips back in 2019. She's only alive because she was not there. I asked her what happened. She said the people on my left, the house on my left, the house on my right, almost every house on the street, everybody was shot at gunpoint. She said her sister was in a secure shelter, and she was talking to them, and Hamas was trying to break in. She said kids watch their parents be shot, and they've been kidnapped into Gaza. She said she's seen the pictures of babies mutilated from her village. She'll never be able to go back to her village. She's lost everything. So we're only up here talking because Iran backed Hamas and did all this, because they hate Jews. They hate Jews, they hate Israel, they hate America, they hate Americans. That's why we're here. 31 Americans are dead. We don't know how many Americans are held hostage. 1,400 Israeli Americans and Europeans are dead. They're dead. I want to make sure Iran gets held accountable and Hamas gets held accountable. Hamas needs to be destroyed. Every member of Hamas needs to be murdered, killed. They need to be dead, what they did. So, as you've heard, we have a president that appeases Iran. So if you look at some of the pictures and some of the videos about the attack, what they have? They had humanitarian aid, first aid kits that Hamas is using. If you look at Israeli TV, you see a whole bunch of pictures of rice bags with bullets in it to go to Hamas. But so this is our money going to Hamas. That's exactly what it is. So today, President Biden announced $100 million more money to aid for Gaza and the West Bank. That's our money. As we go, while they're holding Americans. They're holding Americans, and we're going to give them money. Would you do that? Who would do that? Who would give someone, they're holding your family hostage, they've killed your family, and we give them money? This is crazy. So I've got a bill. I'm going to do a UC this afternoon, Stop Taxpayer Funding the Hamas Act. It's going to stop this. And I wish we had a president that understood this appeasement doesn't work, and started talking about the 31 Americans that died and the unbelievable number of Americans that are still being held hostage. What in the hell is he doing to get them back? Why would we spend a minute of our time and clearly none of our money to figure out how to get more aid to Gaza to help terrorists? This makes no sense. So we got a botched withdrawal from Afghanistan that think about it. We stranded thousands of Americans behind enemy lines, took the lives of, and this didn't need to happen. 13 heroic U.S. service members died. We left billions of dollars of military equipment behind. Now some of that's reportedly being used by Hamas in their raid against Israel and in their still attacking the IDF. By the way, let me tell you a story about this. This is anybody that's been in the service. My service tags, we have 2 service tags and they're not shaped like this, but this service tag was given to me by 2 parents. They're American families that their kids grew up in the States and they joined the IDF. So outside our office, we put a poster of all the hostages. I don't think at the White House they have that. But the top is Hebrew, and they came to me, their kids grew up and they joined the IDF and they were captured the first night and they haven't heard from them. So 2 people have told me different things. It says the hostages or their hearts are in Gaza and bring them home now. And don't you wish we had a president that would do that? So we got a military that's more focused on pronouns and being lethal. We got the complete destruction of women's sports. Did you see that thing, the clip came out where I think it was a lacrosse game that a male played women's sports and really sent this little girl to the hospital. People getting paid not to work. Now think about a guy that ran on getting jobs back. I don't think that makes sense. We got crime rampant all across our country. People break the laws and there's no enforceability. We got a nation where criminals have more rights than victims. We appease our dictators. You got merged dictators. They're eroding freedom, democracy, stability around the world. And does our president stand up and say, no way? No, he says, let's go over and say hi. So Schumer just went over there. So now Israel's under attack and at war, and Joe Biden is reduced, well, think about it, he reduced oil sanctions and they gave Iran, $6 billion? And he can't talk about it, he can't talk about hostages. So we know Iranians, Israelis and Americans have been tortured and killed. I was at one of the kibbutz about a half mile from Gaza in 2019 with my wife, and there were babies beheaded there. I talked to a lady that gave us the tour. She said that basically everybody on her street was killed. I mean, this is all at the hands of Iran. It's Iran, Iran-backed terrorists. So we got a president who can barely even talk about the Americans held hostages. You saw that when he did his little talk, he talked about for 50 minutes. He spent 15 seconds on our hostages, and he's talked about Ukraine 23 times. So he ought to be in the Situation Room saying, how the hell do I get these hostages home every second? Instead, he's doing what? Green New Deals, went on the beach in Delaware. So think about it. His State Department admitted that if we give money to Gaza, it goes to Hamas. They admitted it. His State Department, not Trump's, his State Department. They said it's likely to go to Iran-backed terrorists. And he said, okay. They said we should, think about it, we should be, when you see this stuff, you think, how could that happen? I've been up there 5 years, you say, how can we be doing these things? So I filed a bill, and here it's really difficult to understand. It seems pretty logical. It says we are not going to give money to Hamas. Real controversial, right? So I went down the Senate. Yeah. So I went, now who could vote against that, right? So I go down the Senate floor, and guess what? Bernie Sanders and Chuck Schumer blocked it. So it just said, it was like one page. It says all they have to do is say we're not going to give American taxpayers to Hamas. But it failed. I mean, you can't make this stuff. So here's my deal. We need to talk about the atrocities. We need to talk about what happened, and we've got to support Israel. And we've got to make sure they completely destroy Hamas. So somebody said, oh, gosh, they said, oh, we need to have a ceasefire. I agree. We ought to have a ceasefire the moment after every Hamas terrorist is dead.
I've been up here 5 years, and I think the inspector generals, the independent inspector generals, the GAO, the comptroller and the currency, they actually give us pretty good information to able to do our oversight job. So I want to thank you for that. So in my state, people are sort of sick and tired of the federal government. They don't, there's not a lot of trust left in the federal government. They think, it wasn't before, but with the pandemic, they just see this unbelievable waste. I've talked to people that say, you know, we got money we weren't supposed to get, and they told us, just keep it. This stuff's crazy. I've been, from the day we looked at the CARES Act, I opposed the state and local bailouts because I didn't believe the revenues were going to go down that much. And I'd been a governor, and I knew where my tax base was going to be, and it wasn't going away. But it happened. I think the state and local bailouts total about $500 billion. $500 billion. I think the total revenue for under the state budgets, the collection by the states is about $1 trillion. So that's a lot of darn money. But here's some of the headlines. Biden administration to fund crack pipe distribution to advance racial equity out of state and local bailout money. That's one. Vaccine bonuses, aid to businesses, and a golf course. I thought the money was supposed to go over COVID and to save people's lives. Citizen states put $350 billion stimulus windfall to widely varied use. Flush with COVID-19 aid, schools stir funding to sports. That's interesting. Connecticut City used COVID relief funds to hire a marching band. Probably all like marching bands, but that doesn't seem smart. I've got a list, a mile long of different things, examples. Luxury hotels, golf courses, boathouse construction, aquarium maintenance, basketball hall of fame, art festivals, municipal anniversary celebrations, weed eaters, auto repairs, horse feed, sea urchin hatcheries, walkways at zoos, fire hydrants, and trash cans and swag bags. State and local bailout forward to save people's lives. Now, I try to think about how my voters think about this. So I think we've been in a rush, we went to a fast food place, and we ordered a meal through the darn line. We rushed out, we got our food, and we got on the highway, and we found out those darn French fries weren't there. It's sort of the way I think a lot of people think of the federal government now. They say, well, I'm willing to pay my taxes, but I'm not getting what I paid for. And then I also thought about we've all bought houses, right? And you remember how we always hire those darn inspectors that cost us money, and we think we're going to know what we got? And then afterwards, we find that the pool doesn't work, and it was, they didn't check that. Or gosh, there's a leak in the roof. So you guys bust your butts, okay? I mean, you do. I mean, I like all your reports and everything. So put yourself in my position. I got the people in my state saying, why do we spend the money like this? You guys are trying to do your job. Why doesn't this work? First off, have you guys had the experience with a fast food place? Probably have, right? And houses, we all have. I just talked to a friend of mine that said she had no idea they didn't even check her pool, but and she just bought a house. But what would your response be to people in Florida? Any of you? Because this fraud is just rampant.
Yeah, look, I think this is something we've seen over and over again. Particularly the problem here was, as the legislation was put forward and the agencies implemented it, the legislation didn't require, for example, certain checks and controls. The legislation could have been tightened up to do that. And then the agencies' view was, going back to the chair's question, all about speed. It was, we just need to get the money out. The country is shut down. This is particularly in March and April 2020. We just need to get the money out. You IGs, you law enforcement folks, go figure it out later where the fraudsters are. We're just going to get the money out. And that resulted in tens, hundreds of billions of dollars in fraud. And so two overlaying concepts, I will say, is I think Congress, as it legislates, needs to think about, with a program like the Coronavirus Relief Fund, CRF, the first $150 billion, which was in the CARES Act for state and local entities, and then the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, which was the $350 billion in the ARP bill. Both of those had very little parameters as to what they could be used for. And so they were lawfully used for certain things that people would ask the questions. Those don't seem tied into the pandemic. And so Congress can legislate better, and agencies certainly can do a much better job. We've written, all of us here, hundreds of recommendations, probably thousands at this point of recommendations on how the executive branch and agencies can do a better job in implementing these programs. And the problem, I've talked about this over and over again, the problem with sending this money out is the hundreds of billions of dollars that didn't go to the small businesses, that didn't go to the unemployed from the UI programs, that didn't go to various folks that state and locals perhaps we think should have funded. They didn't get the money. This wasn't an unlimited sum of money. It was a large sum of money, but it wasn't unlimited. So every dollar that went somewhere else didn't go to the people who really needed it, or the businesses that really needed it.
Did you guys even have the power to look at the state and local bailout money?
Yeah, we did.
You did?
And we have. And so we've worked with the Treasury Inspector General. They've relied, actually, we created, for example, with our analytics platform, a risk scoring model, taking 27 variables and helping them have that information so they could assess the risk in both the CRF and the SLFRF program, the two state and local programs. And they've identified, in the latest numbers, $2.24 billion in question costs from their work and relying in part on our data.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So we know that requirements for strategic fraud risk management have been in place since 2016 for the agencies. And we also know that the lag in implementing those requirements in normal operations led to some of the large gaps in what we saw in the pandemic. And we wanted to get behind that, right? What is going on? Why are these lags continuing? So in a recent survey that we did of the 24 CFO Act agencies, we asked them about the challenges and what might incentivize you to take these actions that we want. So behavioral economics, we think, is the way to go. Try to figure out what's going on, what's preventing them, what are the barriers, and what can nudge them in the direction that we want. Now, the challenges are not going to be super surprising. It's access to data and resources and analytic capabilities and tools and techniques, which we think that a centralized, government entity like Treasury's Office of Payment Integrity can address some of those issues. On the incentive side, there are a number of things that the CFO Act agencies mentioned, like congressionally directed funding for payment integrity, ability to demonstrate return on investment from fraud risk management activities, a couple of other things. And one of the things that we're going to be doing in the new year in GAO is delving into some of these incentives and these barriers to taking a strategic approach to fraud risk management.
Thank you. Senator Ernst, I'll yield to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thanks